Hello and welcome to the Voice Extra podcast. Today I am here with writer and recent graduate.
Rosie Doyle.
Hi, how you doing today, Rosie?
I'm doing great, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Weather's alright. I'm feeling okay today. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's quite up and down, isn't it? Depending on the day with lockdown, it can kind of vary a bit.
Yeah. And I guess it's weird because, like, even if the weather's nice, it's not like you're exactly going far anyway, so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like FOMO is there a little bit, but also because everyone's not doing anything, that's definitely helping, I think.
Okay, so if you weren't stuck at home, Rosie, what would you be doing right now?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would be on my Easter holidays right now, because I work in a college. So I'd probably be out
Yeah.
and about on the beach. I live near Brighton, so yeah, definitely on the beach, seeing my friends, and probably just definitely making the most of the sunny weather. I love the heat, and I really was looking forward to it after all the rain we had in the winter. So yeah, it's a bit
Yeah.
different at the moment.
Very different, I guess, yeah. I mean, if you've got like a garden or something, you could still get a little bit of it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I feel very lucky that I have a bit of a garden, so I can go out and about. And I live like quite in the countryside, so I've actually found people are really friendly. Obviously from a distance, but I felt like I've
Yeah.
got right in this strange village community, which I hadn't really had after coming back from uni. I feel like I've turned into this villager after being in lockdown. So that's been quite interesting to get used to as well. What about you?
I basically get out via cycling. Um, that's basically how I get my like portion of outside in the days. There are a lot of days where I don't go out. It's kind of bad, but I need to get better at making sure I do go outside sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like cycling is quite a good thing to do though because I don't know, I feel like you can really get your heart pumping and it's not just like going for a walk as well.
So obviously, there's whilst you're at home, yeah, there's a lot of time to do different things. So what have you been playing or watching or reading or anything like that to kind of get through this time?
Yeah, so last night I was watching Unorthodox. I don't know if you've heard of it or heard anything about it, but it's a Netflix series and it just kind of came up and I was like, oh, give it a watch. Didn't really know much about it, but it was so good. I've listened to 2 episodes so far. They're actually called Parts, so maybe a bit different to like a normal
Yeah.
Netflix series. But it's about a young Orthodox Jewish woman who flees her arranged marriage and her kind of religious community in New York to go and start a life abroad in Berlin. And it was so interesting. I'd never watched anything like it before. It was mainly in Yiddish as well. I don't know if you've watched anything in Yiddish before, but it was my first time. I think it's the first Netflix series to be in Yiddish, or mostly in Yiddish. So that was really interesting. But what I quite liked about it is it had quite universal themes of like coming of age that a lot of people can relate to, like kind of, I don't know, grappling with your own sense of identity, growing up, that we can all relate to when we were teenagers. But there's this also this really interesting Jewish culture that I didn't really know much about, and it's just in such like intimate detail the way it's portrayed. Like there's on the second episode, literally the whole marriage ceremony is played out when it flashes back to her New York lifestyle before she leaves this protagonist. Quite often when you watch a series, it doesn't often take the time to just show one scene in so much detail. But the whole marriage ceremony, with every kind of little detail, was added, like the costumes and the music that's traditionally used. And I just found that really interesting and something I didn't really know about before.
Yeah, I guess Netflix has kind of really come into its own in this time because like there's Tiger King as well, like because
Yeah.
everyone's kind of at home, they need things.
What did you think of Tiger King? Because I have to admit, I've only watched one episode. Have you watched it?
Oh, okay. I've watched all of it across like 3 days. I think I watched it across.
Yeah.
I couldn't get to it all at once, but basically, how I felt was the kind of it's doesn't do a good job of highlighting some of the stuff that goes on. Like it takes a very specific perspective, and then it doesn't really go into some of the stuff. Like there's some stuff to do with abuse in there that's kind of glossed over.
Mm.
Animals, kind of. ceased to actually be a focus point. Like I find it like it's an entertaining documentary, but
Yeah.
I feel like it doesn't really have a point in a way that is weird when it's dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. But you might not see that in the first episode, but the more you go on, the more you kind of end up thinking about what the actual documentary people were trying to do, because they take a perspective that is almost a bit sensationalist rather than like trying to find out what's actually going on.
That's exactly the word. That's what I was thinking of when I watched the first episode, that it seemed sensationalist, that it had this really interesting message and topic that was very like hard hitting and serious, but a strange way of portraying it almost. It didn't get into the details or maybe deal with the ethical implications of what it was doing. And I wondered if like series like that, would they be as popular if it wasn't for lockdown? I wonder if Tiger King would still be really popular because it's an interesting concept, or whether because of lockdown it's kind of become more popular because people have gone on with the trend and they're more likely to sit and watch 6 or 7 hours of a series. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess it's also kind of like, it's almost, because we're all inside, it's kind of a return to the sort of pre-streaming and pre there being a million and one channels thing of there's just this one show that everyone watches and everyone can talk about, and it's kind of rare to get those nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. Every kind of Zoom call I've had with people, it's been like, "Oh, have you watched have you watched Netflix? Have you watched Tiger King?" Um, and that's been strange, and it's almost created a strange culture where you feel like you're missing out on something, even when you're at home, if you're not watching it.
Yeah.
Which I don't think I really felt before necessarily.
I think it gives me the same vibe as like, I haven't watched any Game of Thrones, and when that was going on, and everyone would be like, "You haven't watched it. You need to catch up. Why have you not watched it?" And I'm like, "There's like 8 seasons or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
oh, I'm
tired."
the same. That makes me feel better. I'm the same. I haven't watched it either, and I always feel like a bit guilty for not having watched it. But I think what's interesting as well is because everyone is using the same, pretty much the same streaming sites. I know there are obviously some others, so it ends up that everyone's watching very similar things, which is quite strange, really. And it feels like you've almost got to compete or keep up with what's going on, or what things
Yeah.
are coming out all the time, and like new releases. Um, yeah, and I don't know whether that's a good way of watching things, and whether you should just be watching things you want to watch as well.
Yeah, I guess that is the thing where you're like, "Oh no, I have to watch all episodes of this thing or I won't get all the jokes on my timeline."
Yeah, no,
Because,
exactly.
yeah,
Like all the memes that come from things as well. It's like a whole part of our online culture, really.
yeah. So, is there anything else you've been kind of getting involved in as you've been at home?
Yeah, so I really like there's this poet online that I like called Harry Baker, and he's like a world poetry slam champion. He does a
Ooh,
lot of like spoken word stuff. And he's been posting some really lovely like poetry online. And I know that sometimes like poetry can be a bit pretentious and it's not always accessible, I think, anyway. But I've quite liked the format of him just posting like a poem a day from a poet he really likes online. And there was one in particular by a lady called Erin Bolenz, I think that's how you pronounce her name, called Miss
yeah,
Pandemic 2020, that I really liked, and it really resonated with me because it was just about this whole idea that we can't win lockdown, and we can't be competitive necessarily in our actions during lockdown.
yeah. I like write and read a lot of poetry, so I'm very much like, this gives me the chance to actually read some more stuff. Like I was
Yeah,
reading, I think, Bury It by Sam. This is like collection by Sam Sachs,
yeah,
and it's basically about like a bunch of different things. And it's about like mental health amongst gay men, stuff like that. It's really interesting as a like piece of poetry, well, not one piece, like as a collection of poetry, and also just like Instagram is very useful for finding random poets that you've never heard of.
yeah. I really find that, and I know that some people might say Instagram has meant that poems or poetry has changed because now the poems that are more effective are much shorter. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it can help you to initially be attracted to a poet, but then hopefully people will go and explore their other work as well online. And there's something so nice about having a real kind of a short poem that you can read in a book, and you can get so much from, especially during this time when it can be quite difficult to take much in or to have much concentration on anything. it can be really rewarding to just read something short but still be able to take so many themes or messages from it.
Yeah, because I can't remember. There's a great example that someone uses for like how you can make something short and effective. I think it's someone wrote like a poem which was literally new baby shoes for sale, never worn, or something like that.
Oh
And it's
yeah, I've
like
seen that
you
one.
can tell us, yeah,
Yeah, and so many stories can come from such a short, snappy piece that you might read. And there are lots of poets like Rupi Kaur who's kind of, I don't know, lots of poets have benefited because their poems are just so beautiful and evocative, and they really work on that Instagram format.
yeah.
Um, but it's interesting. I wonder if all poets feel like they can adapt to that. It must be hard to feel like you have to adapt to this social media world if you want to kind of have your poems out there as well.
I don't know. I guess it's just like with all art, it just changes in varying ways. Like I've seen a lot of spoken word artists doing like Zoom calls or Instagram lives and stuff like that to still reach people even without being literally with them in person.
Yeah, and that's a really nice sense of like community and a collective action that you can do. And I think it shows that there is still room for creatives during this time, because sometimes, I don't know if you found this, but sometimes everything can seem so trivial during lockdown. And why should I think that I should be able to create something during this time? Doesn't that just seem a bit pretentious or whatever? But actually,
Yeah.
it can be such a good way of connecting, and it can make people feel good and feel like they're part of something.
Yeah, like there's this poet I follow on Instagram. I think it's called 1990s Chris, and he's
Yeah.
basically sent a bunch. Basically, he was like, "Hey, if anyone's feeling down or whatever, let me know, and I'll write you a poem about your worries to kind of help you make you feel better." And I was like, "Oh, that's a really
Oh,
nice thing to just do."
that's so nice. Do you know what? I had a similar thing actually. So Harry Baker, this guy that I follow, that I'm a bit of a big fan of, he was giving out some of his books for free, and he's got this book called The Sunshine Kid, and
Yeah.
I literally just sent him a message and was like, oh, I'd love one of your books. And he sent me his poetry book, his little anthology, and it's got like he signed it and said like put my name on and everything, and it's such a nice gesture,
Oh,
and it sounds quite similar to this Instagram guy. It's a really personal thing to do during this time for someone.
it's really great to kind of like find those connections, and it's interesting that because we're in this time, these connections are now being created. I guess.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Did you want to maybe like read one of the poems you've been thinking about at this time? Or
Yeah, sure. So I'll go for the one I was talking about earlier called Miss Pandemic 2020 by Erin Bolen. Okay. um, You do not have to be productive. You are not a dairy cow or a field of wheat. Nothing will grind to a halt if you do not take up the ukulele, learn Spanish, start to crochet, master Pilates. This is not a competition. There will be no Miss Pandemic 2020. You cannot get a sash out of this. You cannot win a crisis. Only hold each second like you might hold a hand and think, what can I do with you? And you, and you. Before long, you will have collected a minute. Minute collecting is my new hobby. I'm practicing a lot. I'm trying to do it as carefully and slowly as possible. And when I cry, I use these minutes I've collected to keep myself up. I look around those minutes and see what lives there, and then I start again. Everything has changed. It is okay for this not to feel like a holiday. It's not a holiday. We are scared of air. I tried to do yoga yesterday, but instead swore at the screen and had a coffee, and that's okay.
I think that's great. I think one of the things that hits on as well is kind of the thing where you don't want to force. What I've been thinking about at least is not trying to force productivity at this time, because I have a personally at least have a thing where I always feel like I have to fill time, and you have to kind of realize, I guess, that you don't need to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a real product of our time, this idea of having to measure yourself against how productive you're being all the time, and to just feel busy and feel like what you're doing is necessary and important. And I just like the simplicity of it, and the bit at the end where it's kind of like, swearing at the screen and just having a coffee, and that's okay. And I found it quite relatable, and important to recognize as well that in this time we're not all in a position to be being productive, and not everyone has access to just being able to work through it as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important. I guess it's like how there was that tweet which was like King Lear wrote, or no, Shakespeare wrote King Lear in quarantine. It was like, please relax.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, and it's just like, well, Shakespeare was one person who went through that. Yeah.
We don't have to be Shakespeare. We can just
No.
be ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Have you found yourself being like more or less productive, do you think, during this time?
I think I don't know. It's a bit weird. Like I think I have days where I'm really productive and days where I'm just literally just vegging out. But
Yeah.
I feel like I would have to tally it up in the end. But I'm enjoying the fact that I don't necessarily have to do anything at a specific time. That I can kind of like figure out my own schedule in a way that's just better for me. I think.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to kind of shape your own routine without sometimes the constraints of other things going on as well.
Is there anything else you've been consuming you'd want to talk
Yeah, so this is a bit of a strange one, but I read this article in the LA Times. It was talking about vocabulary, coronavirus vocabulary, and the more I read it, the more I thought, wow, yeah, the words that I'm using have actually changed quite dramatically since this has all happened. Like even just thinking about basic things like self-isolation and social distancing and unprecedented and these words that we've all just suddenly started saying, I
about?
think part of me thinks it's quite funny because we we've adapted so quickly to this lingo. I think it's a real measure of how we don't really have that much control in what we're doing, and how quickly our society can change. And also something I didn't know that the World Health Organization isn't actually recommending the word social distancing. They're actually using physical distancing because they really
Oh,
want to make
okay.
sure people are connected
Oh,
socially.
that does make sense actually.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was quite a good idea, just because in terms of like mental health and feeling connected, social distancing. It does have different
Yeah.
connotations to physical distancing. Are there any kind of words that you find yourself using that you wouldn't normally use, or like phrases that you've heard other people start to use?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I guess there's like all the big ones, but I haven't necessarily heard any new words. But there's lots of things which people are doing which are just like, oh, we're doing this now. I never would have done this before, but I guess we're like big group video calls a lot is the
Yeah.
sort of thing where before it was just wasn't happening, and now
Yeah, big video, or I guess like Zooming or Zoom. I wonder, I don't, I mean, maybe you used Zoom before lockdown, but I didn't really use it. So when people are like, oh, I'm just Zooming or I'm just on a Zoom, I now know what that means. And I don't think it would have had the same connotations before. I wouldn't have known what they were talking about. So that's an interesting one. And yeah, video calls as well. How do you find them? Do you feel quite connected to people when you're doing video calls?
I think it depends on who I'm calling. Sometimes video calls can be good, but sometimes when it's like 8 people and the internet isn't great and whatever, it's stressful
Yeah.
if I'm honest.
Oh, when there's too many people and you're trying to say something and then you've got to wait because someone else trying to say something, you don't want to interrupt them. And then,
Yeah,
and they're like, no, you'll go. And it's such like a British thing as well of like, oh, no, I'll wait for you. It's just like, oh.
and then also you have a thing where if there's like delay on the thing, there's a delay, so then you're waiting. The delay gets in the way. You're just like, what's going on?
Oh, or sometimes someone will like go, they'll just disappear for a bit, and then you sort of think, oh, do we all now just sit here and wait for you to rejoin, or do we carry on? Where have they gone? Someone in the group ends up having to sort of message. I mean, have you been doing anything? I had a quiz last week, which was fun. My old friends from uni did a quiz, and one of the rounds that we made was kind of digging out old social media things that people had said, which was
Oh no.
quite funny. So that really kept everyone entertained. I think this week we're doing fancy dress during the quiz, so yeah, that'll be
Yeah,
interesting.
that does actually sound really fun. I've mostly been doing like watching films and stuff with people over um using things like Netflix Party, stuff like that.
How have you found using Netflix Party so far?
I think it's good. It's kind of it's fine as an extension. I guess I it does a job. Sometimes it goes out of sync, which is a bit odd, but whatever.
It can be quite fun, can't it? Because you can you can pause it, and then that means that it pauses it for everyone else.
Yeah,
So it can be, yeah. I don't know about. I like the idea of being able to watch it exactly the same time as someone. I'm still getting used to the chat bot at the side, and whether I think that's useful to be able to kind of message someone all the way through, or whether sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want to watch the film and then talk to them afterwards. Yeah, so that's been something. Another thing actually that I've been doing is sort of listening to more podcasts and finding
yeah,
ones that I hadn't really looked at before. There's a New Yorker podcast, and I think there's a certain number that you're allowed to listen to for free because it's a subscription magazine, but I don't.
got it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can listen to it for free. And there was an interesting one recently. It was called "Amid a Pandemic: Catharsis at 7 o'clock." So it was just talking about the pandemic in New York. And it covered some interesting issues about, say, the 7 o'clock clapping and the sense of like the joy and community that came for clapping for care workers and for nurses and
hmm
doctors at 7 o'clock, but also the injustice of the pandemic, and that it's really important to recognise how it's affecting people in New York. It was talking
yeah,
particularly about African Americans and how I guess it's like a twofold issue because firstly, a lot of African Americans just don't have access to the same healthcare because of economic issues as well. And another issue that they were talking about that was quite interesting was and really shocking, frankly, was that often when African Americans are going in to the hospitals anyway, they're not getting treated as
yeah.
quickly as other people because doctors just aren't believing that their issues are authentic because of a
Yeah,
bias.
there's kind of a thing with that in the UK, particularly to do with maternity. There's like a lot of statistics in terms of the way black women get treated when they go in for maternity related stuff, and a lot of problems to do with that. That I would recommend anyone listening go look up because it's not great, but it's definitely something that we need to be aware
Completely, yeah. And I think in this whole pandemic, talking about health, I think it's so important that when we talk about the pandemic, we recognise that people are affected in different ways, and it is discriminating. And what is frustrating me a little bit is this whole dialogue that keeps going on that the pandemic does not discriminate. This pandemic does not discriminate, and yeah, everyone can get it. Everyone can get coronavirus, but we need to be thinking about our attitudes towards people and the way that certain people have better access to healthcare than
of.
others.
Yeah, because like it's a lot easier to self isolate if you're Prince Charles than if
Yeah,
you're
completely.
someone who's on the red line.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's such an important conversation to address. Yeah, and something that can kind of sometimes slip under the radar because there's a sense of everyone coming together to self isolate, and actually, it's not always easy for everyone to be self isolating. Actually, on this topic as
Yeah,
well, I don't know if you
exactly.
saw. I just saw this last night. They're saying they've changed. I think like sorry, let me get my thoughts. They were saying that for people with autism or learning difficulties, they are changing the lockdown restrictions so they can go out more than once a day.
Yeah,
Which again was interesting, and I'm glad that in some ways the government is taking on board the idea that it's necessary that to adapt the rules because not the same rules can work for everyone.
yeah, exactly. I'm very glad that I didn't know that was a thing, but I'm very glad they did that because there are a lot of concerns to do with um mental health related stuff and this sort of lockdown because of the way in which certain people essentially need to be outside or stuff like that as part of coping mechanisms.
Yeah, definitely, and just the recognition I think is important. Where I work, yeah, trying to imagine some of those young people having to stay indoors, I think they'd have found it really challenging. So I'm glad that it's been raised and actually got into the regulations as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Okay. Have you been making anything during this time at home?
The only thing I have been doing is a bit of photography, and I'm not an expert at
Ooh,
all. I have a Canon camera that I haven't really used that much, but this might sound a bit strange, but I've been getting really into taking pictures of farm animals because there's nothing else to take pictures of. I can't take pictures of people because there are no people. So I've been going out for walks and kind of like from a distance taking pictures of like nature and animals, and it's not to go
that's great.
anywhere, but there's been something really cathartic about just taking pictures and it not having to be amazing or something that gets posted anywhere, but just for a bit of fun. I think it's definitely helped me to be a bit more observant of where I live,
Hmm.
because I live in the countryside, but normally I don't really spend much time here. I'm out and about, and it's actually been useful to be rooted somewhere and have to kind of take in my local surroundings a bit more. Yeah, what
Yeah,
about you? Have you
definitely.
been creating anything?
I've been writing. I've basically just been writing a bit too much, probably. Uh, I have lots. I have like 3 Google Docs open right now. It's a bit of a mess,
I've been very impressed with the
but yeah,
content. The amount of content you have been getting out has been, yeah, exceptional.
yeah. That's basically what I've been doing to keep myself busy, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's used. I think I just thought of another thing I've been doing actually, which is cooking. And again, it's
Yes.
something, I don't know if you find this, but there's something about like creating something, because you have to do it, you have to eat, so you might as well make it nice. And I've found it useful to create something, and you instantly get the reward of getting to eat it. And it's just nice to eat lots of good food as well. So we're doing lots of like veggie bolognese and things like that. But yeah, have you been doing anything like that?
Yeah, I did some baking, and I was like, oh, this actually didn't go badly.
Oh, good,
Because
nice.
I don't normally bake, but
What did you
thought I might as
bake?
well try a bit. And it actually went all right, which was good.
What did you bake?
I baked these like bean cakes called akara. Well, it's not really baking. Baking is a weird way to describe it because the way you make it is more like frying, but it ends up like a bean cake. So I'm just gonna say it's adjacent. But yeah, I'd never done it before, and I did it with my family, and it was actually pretty good. It was
Oh,
fun.
nice. I feel like it's a nice time to like cook things with family or for family as well.
Yeah.
And come together to do something. Because we're often all so busy. It's been nice to spend more time with people. Although I'm sure, like you, looking forward to being able to see other people.
Yes. Yeah, there is a thing where you're like, you lot are great, but also I don't need to see the same like few faces.
Yeah, nice to mix it up a bit. Um, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing people. What's kind of the first thing you want to do when the restrictions are reduced and we go back to kind of normality?
I think it's just seeing people is important, isn't it? It's just like
Yeah,
I don't even necessarily want to talk to people. I just want to be in a space where other people are.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
just like that feeling of having other people around you is something I'm very used to having, and not having it now is a bit odd.
Yeah, I've felt that. Yeah, and actually, when someone has said hello to me when I've gone for my walk, and like someone from a distance has just sort of said morning or afternoon or whatever, hello, it's been like, oh, it's been so nice to have someone say hello to me, and I never thought I'd feel like that in the same way. Normally you're just so on the move, um, but just to
Yeah,
be around, to be in the presence of other people.
definitely. Okay, I have one last question for you, which
Yeah.
is you've got the podium at the daily briefing. You've got the eyes of the nation on you. What would you want to say to them?
Oh wow, that's a big one. I would say um, keep going and stay connected with your loved ones, whether that be your friends or your family. Just keep an eye out on people and know that this too shall pass.
Perfect. Okay, so Rosie, Where can people find you online after this podcast?
They can find me on Twitter at Rosie Doyle 123, and my Instagram is Rosie, and there's a double underscore Doyle.
Perfect. Okay, so you can find this podcast in any of your podcast apps, and you can find the post on Voice at voicemag.uk, and you can find Instagram where the contributors post at voice.extra, the regular Instagram at voicemaguk, and the same thing for Twitter. So you can go to at voicemaguk to find the bunch of stuff that loads of different people are putting up, especially in a time like this. So, thank you for joining me, Rosie, and thank you all for listening. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for Shaving Mirror. You can find his stuff on incompetech.com.